in the previous class when we were discussing about the chapter 14 of English literature, that is Scout Shows the Way. So in this chapter, we have learned that this is the chapter written by Harper Lee, and the extract that is given in your book is the extract that is taken from her very famous novel To Kill a Mockingbird. And here, so far in this chapter, we have discussed that there is a Scout Finch and his elder brother Jim and the father Atticus. The father Atticus was preparing a case to defend Mr. Tom Robinson, who had been falsely accused of a crime which he did not commit actually. And some men came to meet the father Atticus. They were the strangers to the children, and the father, the lawyer, did not want to involve his children there, but both the children, the Jim and the Scout Finch, reached that place, and there they had a conversation. The father was asking to Jim to go home and take the Scout Finch also along with her. But seeing the situation, the boy, the elder brother, Jim, could sense the seriousness of the situation, that it may be difficult for his father to handle all this alone. So he was not ready to go home. There it was mentioned that in most of the cases, both the children followed the instructions of the father without asking any question. But this time, the boy was not ready to follow the instructions. He was not ready to go home. Then what happened? One of the men hurt Jim, and as a reaction of that, Scout Finch also hit that man. And then someone asked the father Atticus to ask their children to leave from that place, and he gave only 15 seconds for that. This much we have discussed in the last period. Now today I'll start further. In the midst of this strange assembly, Atticus stood trying to make Jem mind him. I ain't going, was his steady answer to Atticus' threat, requests, and finally, please, Jem, take them home. So, what all was going on there? Uh, Among all those situations, the father the father was continuously trying to convince the Jem to go home. He threatened him, he requested him. If you have heard this thing in Hindi, there is called, it is Sam Dam Dand Bhed. So means anyhow or somehow you convince someone to do something. So the father was adopting the same strategy, Sam Dam Danbe, that anyhow Jem would get ready to go home and to take her younger sister along with her. But there was a very steady answer from the Jem. He was very much adamant that he was not going to leave his father there in that situation. I was getting a bit tired of that. Now here we have discussed. Sorry, I told you in the previous class that this is narrated in the first person. So here I means the Scout Finch, but felt Jim had his own reasons for doing as he did in view of his prospects once Atticus did get home. In view of his prospects means in the view of what was in store for him. And having all this conversation, looking at all the scene, the Scout Finch was getting tired, means she was not sure. The father was instructing again and again to go back to the home, and The Jem was not ready. So she was getting very much confused and tired that what to do. Whether she had to stay there or she should go home. But she was also understanding that if Jem is taking such decision, if Jem was not ready to go home, then there must be a reason for that. Why was she thinking so? Because we have already discussed that both the children usually follow all the instructions of the father without putting any question. And this time, if Jem was so adamant, he was so determined not to leave the place, then there must be some reason which is stored there and which she will come to know when the father will come home. It was a summer's night. The season was summer, but the men were dressed, most of them in overalls and denim shirts buttoned up to the collars. I thought they must be cold natured as their sleeves were unrolled and buttoned at the cuffs. Now here the appearance or the clothing of the people, of the men who were standing there, is described that though it was a summer night, but all the men who were there, they were properly dressed up, overall dressed up, means as much as they could cover themselves with the clothes. Their sleeves were unrolled and buttoned, like you people are asked to do in your school, that you should not fold your sleeves, they should be unrolled and buttoned. Some wore hats pulled firmly down over their ears. Some of them were wearing the hats. They were sullen looking, sleepy eyed men who seemed unused to late hours. Now, she was saying that how they were looking, sullen looking means the people who have bad temper or bad behavior. Means they were not looking good men. Sleepy eyed, they were looking sleepy as if they, because it was the time of night, they wanted to sleep. And who seemed unused to late hours means the people who do not wake up usually for late hours. They must be habitual of sleeping early at the night. I sought once more for a familiar face. Sought is the past form of verb seek. So I sought once more a familiar face, and at the center of semicircle I found one. Earlier in this chapter it was described that when Scout Finch reached to that place where all those men were standing, she looked at all of them and she found that all of them were strangers to her. But with a hope to find a familiar face, she looked around once again, and in that semicircle, the means the men must be standing there in the semicircle, and now she found one face which was familiar, the person to whom she must have seen earlier. Okay. Hey, Mr. Cunningham. The man did not hear me, it seemed. So she greeted that man, but it seemed that the man did not notice her greetings. Hey, Mr. Cunningham, how's your entailment getting along? Now, second time the scout finch greeted to that person, and she asked, how's your entailment getting along? Entailment, the meaning is given here, limitations or restrictions imposed on property. So there must be some property related matter, and the scout finch was asking about that to the person. Mr. Walter Cunningham's legal affairs were well known to me. Now she was telling that she was very well aware of the legal affairs of that person and how she came to know about all that. Atticus had once described them at length, because once her father described all those matters to her in detail. At length means in detail. The big man blinked and hooked his thumbs in his overall straps. He seemed uncomfortable. He cleared his throat and looked away. My friendly overture had fallen flat. Means that person was not taking into account the wishes, the questions, or the conversation that the girl was trying to have with him. So he was becoming very much uncomfortable. So he cleared his throat and he started looking at somewhere else as if he was not listening to the girl. So, by this reaction of that man, my friendly overture has fallen flat. The move that was taken by, that was initiated by the girl for making friends was not succeeded. She was trying to have a friendly conversation because that was the only familiar face to her. So her attempt, her move to have a friendly conversation with Mr. Walter was not successful at all here. Mr. Cunningham wore no hat, and the top half of his forehead was white in contrast to his sun-scorched face, which led me to believe that he wore one most days. He shifted his feet clad in heavy work shoes. Now, here she described the look of Mr. Walter or Mr. Cunningham. He was not wearing hat, as most of the men who were present there were wearing the hat. It was mentioned earlier where it was described about the look of all the other men, but this person was not wearing the hat and his forehead was white and rest of the face was not in a similar complexion with the forehead. It was dark. It is mentioned here to his sun-scorched face. Sun-scorched face means scorched means something that has the signs of burn. So if basically sunburn. So rest of the face was looking like that only, which led me to believe, which shows that although he was not wearing the hat at that particular time, because but most of the time he used to wear the hat. That's why the forehead was white and rest of the face was of dark complexion. He shifted his feet clad in heavy work shoes. Now, if someone was standing, he shifted his feet and he was wearing heavy work shoes made up of clothes. Clad means of some heavy clothes. Don't you remember me, Mr. Cunningham? Again, the girl was continuously putting her efforts to have a conversation with him. Again, she asked him, "Don't you remember me, Mr. Cunningham? I am Jane Lois Finch." Now, here she introduced herself that this is my name. I am Jane Lois Finch. You brought us some hickory nuts one time, remember, and she also tried to make him remember that once he brought some nuts for her. I begin to sense the futility one feels when unacknowledged by a changed acquaintance. Now, by the time, as we have discussed, that the man was continuously ignoring the girl, and now she also started sensing that the man was not acknowledging And suddenly the acquaintances means when someone is familiar to you, that familiarity with someone has changed. He was behaving like he was not at all familiar with the girl.